So let's understand why planning and scheduling is important. And by the end of this segment, you begin to see what you're missing should you not go through those particular activities. Okay, so why is planning so important? First of all, as with all things in project management, people are very paramount, whether it's the people that are doing the work or the people who we're giving the work to. Our opinions really matter, and there needs to be agreement. So when we plan, if you think about all that we've talked about, all of those activities that need to happen within that planning process, and then translating all of that into a schedule, you can begin to see why the very first thing that we really need to achieve is to get everybody on the same page. Okay, now the way to get everybody on the same page is to go through that activity together as much as possible. There are times where a team cannot do everything, every single aspect of the project together, but you've got to find a way that if some people are missing from that process, you save the information somewhere where they can go and access it, and they can go and have a look and ask questions if they need to. So that activity of getting everybody on the same page is what makes planning so important. Get the right people together for the right activity. There may be elements within that circle that we looked at. There may be elements where we do not need every single member of the stakeholder group. But again, what you have to do is to make sure that you've got the right people in the room at that time. Okay, get the key people, get them talking, get them agreeing, and then you can move forward. And the people who were not at that particular discussion, they can then get feedback later. So once we've gone through that process, then we can begin to answer some really important questions. There's always value in having a discussion whereby it's more than one person trying to figure this out on their own. Having the expertise of a business analyst will mean that you are looking at things from the business's perspective. You are looking at things from the stakeholders' perspective. Having the insights of somebody who is technical, if it's a technical project, having the insights of somebody who is very experienced at change management means you have that insight. Having somebody who is a program manager means that they give you a different perspective, and then taking all of that information and then running it by someone who is in your director group is also very important. So you're getting all of these questions that may have come out in your planning process. You're getting answers to these important questions. Some of these questions relate to money. Do we have enough of it? Return on investment. The money we're putting in have we confirmed that our return on investment is sufficient? Are we happy with that return on investment? How long it's going to take? Do we have expertise? So we want to go and build this beautiful bridge. Okay. Do we have the expertise? Do we have to buy that in? Is there anything peculiar about the bridge that we now need to start thinking about how we're going to get that expertise? Because there is, there's some peculiarities around the area that we want to build this bridge in, and we need to make sure that we've got the right people on ground to be able to help. Do we need any special equipment or materials? The time we need versus the time that is available. Have we got a schedule, that tells us how much time we have, against how much time we need? So these are some examples of important questions that are answered during this planning process. And then once you've gone through that process of asking and answering these questions, then you begin to identify, are there any showstoppers? Ongoing planning helps to prepare contingencies. So just because there are problems along the way doesn't mean that we have to halt completely. But it means that if we've identified some possible showstoppers along the way, what is the contingency that we're going to build? What's the mitigation plan? How are we going to reduce the risk of our project coming to an end? So, and that's why planning is so important, because you have a time to have these conversations and have these answers to these questions answered, and then go on to come up with a plan that should the worst happen, this is what we're going to do about what we're going to do. Okay, so that's why planning is very important. Okay, so now let's take a look at why scheduling is so important. So in the very first instance, we have to figure out what we are trying to do. Okay, sometimes our projects are not as clear cut. So sometimes you don't get given a brief whereby, please go and build me a bridge. Sometimes you get given a brief, we actually have a problem and we want you to come up with a solution for us. That happens a lot in technology or sort of like software type projects, where it's not quite clear what we're building. We just have to come up with a solution that is going to solve that particular problem. And that's where it starts to get a bit tricky. So in that particular process, you've got to figure out what it is that we need to do. So first of all, you start out with, well, where do we want to arrive at, which is the outcome, and then you have to sort of like work your way backwards, and then we start to talk about deliverables. We start to talk about phases and tasks and subtasks. So once you've had that discussion, which would have happened in your planning phase, then you've got to break that out into something measurable, especially when you're working in a solution-oriented project management type of environment, because whatever you started out with was more a problem statement rather than a very specific output. You have to be very specific about what it is that you are trying to do. You've got to use a SMART approach. You know, the SMART approach that talks about being specific, that your goal needs to be specific, measurable, achievable. It needs to be realistic. It needs to be achieved in a timely manner. So because you started from a place whereby it was kind of not definite, not concrete, when you come to mapping that out in your schedule, you need something whereby you can break them out into deliverables, into phases, into tasks, and into subtasks, and so that whoever is not really working at the within the project very closely can see how you intend to get to where you want to get to. And this is what we mean by managing scope, because within that particular context, most of the time your resources will be fixed. Okay, most of the time, particularly when you come to Agile Delivery. Now, the thought within Agile Delivery is that the word Agile means that we can kind of like flex all over the place. Actually, that's not the case. Your resources are still going to be fixed. Your budget's still going to be fixed. Your time is going to be fixed. If you've agreed a 2 to 4 week sprint, then you've got to stick to that and come out with your outcomes at the end of the day. And that's why scope management is such a key activity, and using a schedule to show how you've managed your scope and how you intend to get from A to B is very important. A schedule is also very important because it's at that point that you're able to manage your time. If you've mapped out what you want to achieve, and you've put it against start dates, you've put it against finish dates, you've understood how these tasks relate to one another, you've understood how the milestones are going to be achieved, then you can begin to see whether or not what you set is actually achievable. Remember, I talked about the SMART approach. Sometimes we're given a problem, and most of the time when we're given that problem to go and solve, people are, they would be in an estimating type of situation, and they would say something along the lines of, well, please go and solve that problem, and you've got 6 weeks. Now, if you're using a schedule, you'll be able to see whether or not that's achievable. You'll be able to see at the very beginning that, okay, 6 weeks is not going to cut it, and it's not going to cut it because of X, Y, and Z. Why is that? Because you've actually used a schedule to map it all out. And you can go back to your senior stakeholders and say, based on our schedule, this is not going to work. This is not going to work, okay? Based on the schedule that you have given us. And then you can begin to have those conversations and negotiate a different timeline. Why is that? Because you have a schedule. You've been able to map out and you've been able to prove that it's not going to work. And when you use a schedule, then you can start to begin to use tools like the critical path. Now, the critical path is a way that project managers are able to see that those activities that are on the critical path of the project being achieved. So there are certain activities that are on this critical path, and if anything should happen to them in terms of timeline, then that it will definitely impact the project, and that's why they are critical. Having a schedule in a proper scheduling tool will give you such insights, and it will give you even more. It will give you baseline calculations. It will give you resource calculations. It will tell you when your resources are becoming overloaded. It will tell you when your costs are starting to stray. It's activity, it's those activities that will really help when you've employed the scheduling method. And then, this is where we're talking about resources. I just mentioned resources some time ago, where if you have a schedule and you're employing that schedule approach, you start to think ahead in terms of, right, by May, I'm going to need 3 resources from another department. And I need to have those conversations now, not when I need them, not when tomorrow I need these resources and now I have to go to the team lead and have that conversation. No, it gives you a forward looking type of situation if you are using a schedule and if you're using scheduling as part of your project management approach.